Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to thank the distinguished senator from Vermont who has been such a role model to me since I came to the Senate and we started working together on technology issues, and we have worked together on so many matters dealing with appropriations and finance. I just want to thank my good friend for all his counsel, not just on this, but over the years, and I thank him for the courtesy of being allowed to go next. Mr. President, there is now a vitally important debate happening on the Senate floor with respect to judicial nominations. What is clear to me is the majority is now chipping away at a century of bipartisan tradition that has protected the interests of those in our home state and served as a check on the power of the executive. Now it is the Senate bowing down to the White House, derelict in its constitutional responsibility to provide or withhold advice and consent on nominees. In my view, this is a dangerous mistake that is going to have harmful consequences for decades. Today, the debate at hand is over the mishandling of the nomination of Michael Brennan to the Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. This could be the first time in decades that a judicial nominee is confirmed over the objection of a home state senator. Tomorrow, the Senate Judiciary Committee is going to throw out the window a bipartisan practice that dates back more than a century when it holds a hearing on the nomination of Ryan Bounds to sit on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. It goes without saying that individuals who are up for a lifetime seat on a powerful federal court must be forthcoming and truthful in the nomination process. My view is Ryan Bounds hasn't even cleared that low bar. Mr. Bounds misled the independent committee that considers potential nominees in Oregon by withholding inflammatory writings that revealed disturbing views on sexual assault and on communities of people who are vulnerable and disadvantaged. He's had ample opportunity to clean up this mess, express remorse, and explain how his views have changed, but I haven't seen it. The comments that I've seen suggest Mr. Bounds views this as a matter of poor word choice and youthful indiscretion, an issue that he can almost dismiss with a small wave in the hand. In my view, that's wrong, he's wrong, and an individual up for a lifetime seat on a federal bench has an obligation to do better than that. Yet his nomination has moved forward anyway. This action by the majority, what will happen tomorrow, unless common sense and goodwill and tradition prevail tonight, the majority is going to throw in the dustbin a century of bipartisan tradition. Tomorrow will cheapen the advice and consent role of the United States Senate, and this body will cede power to the executive branch. First, to explain what I mean, I'm going to discuss the practice that we have maintained in Oregon with respect to judges. When there are vacancies on the bench, Oregon senators convene an independent committee of Oregonians from all over the legal community to select and interview candidates for judicial nominations. The committee performs a thorough statewide search. It conducts rigorous interviews, and then recommendations are made to Oregon's 2 senators. Senator Merkley and I review those recommendations, and we submit a short list to the President for the President's consideration. For us, this process is the core of what advice and consent is all about when it comes to judicial nominees. We even wrote to the current White House counsel very early on in the new administration, now more than a year ago, to make sure that they were up to date about this long-standing Oregon practice. As part of the work the independent committee does in Oregon, candidates are asked whether anything in their past would have a negative impact on their potential nomination. Any lawyer who's read up on a hard-fought nomination in the past ought to know that inflammatory writings about women, people of color, LGBTQ Americans certainly qualify as potentially threatening to a nomination. Mr. Bounds, however, did not alert our Oregon committee to his writings. He said there was nothing to worry about. In fact, he highlighted his pre-college days in an effort to paint a picture of diversity and tolerance, conveniently skipping over his later intolerant writings. My view is Mr. Bounds misled the committee by this omission, and he was wrong to do so. It was not until after the committee finished its work that these writings came to light. That's why 5 of the 7 members of the independent Oregon Judicial Selection Committee, including the chair, said that this would have changed their decision to include Mr. Bounds among their recommended candidates. Yet the Trump administration and the majority on the Senate Judiciary Committee has moved forward with his nomination anyway, in direct violation of our long-standing practices. Here's the second tradition that could be thrown out, and it goes back yet further. Not once in more than a century has the Senate held a hearing on a judicial nominee without input from either home state senator. This tradition has stood for 101 years, benefiting both sides as a check on the power of the president. Let me just briefly quote a letter that the entire Senate Republican Conference said to the last president at the beginning of his last term in 2009. They wrote that dating back to the nation's founding, the Senate has, and I quote, a unique constitutional responsibility to provide or withhold its advice and consent on nominations. They continued, and I will quote further, Democrats and Republicans have acknowledged the importance of maintaining this principle, which allows individual senators to provide valuable insights into their constituents' qualifications for federal service. So, in 2009, when a Democrat was in the White House, my Republican colleagues stood firm on maintaining this tradition, and Democrats did. The last administration and Democratic leaders here in the Senate respected the request of our Republican colleagues. There were no hearings on judicial nominations when neither home state senator had consented. Now the Republican majority is on the verge of breaking that practice in lockstep with the White House to seat a nominee where there are, in my view, serious red flags. Mr. President and colleagues in the Senate, the White House might believe that providing advice and consent begins and